There is a woman still being addressed as Your Majesty in an apartment in Brooklyn, in a country that no longer exists on any modern map. There is another woman locked inside her own palace while her national flag comes down outside. There is a third carried out on a palanquin at 1 in the morning, escorted by 400 men while her capital sleeps. This isn't about jewels. This is about the exact moment a crown stops being power and becomes luggage. 10 women. 10 last crowns. 10 different ways a monarchy can die. Number 10 begins in Manhattan. In 1959, a 19-year-old college student named Hope Cook walked into the lounge of the Windermere Hotel in Darjeeling and met a widowed crown prince. 4 years later, 14 lamas married her to Palden Thondup Namgyal, the 12th Chogyal of Sikkim. She renounced her American citizenship. She became Gyalmo, queen of a Himalayan kingdom that had ruled itself since 1642. Life magazine ran the wedding. American papers called it a fairy tale. Behind the photographs, there was a problem no ceremony could hide. Sikkim was not fully independent. It was a protectorate. Its independence was rented from India. By 1973, the fairy tale was collapsing. A pro-democracy movement filled the streets. The Indian press labeled her a CIA spy queen. In July of that year, she left Gangtok for New York with her 2 children. She would never live in Sikkim again. On the 9th of April 1975, Indian troops surrounded the palace, disarmed the royal guard, and placed the Chogyal under house arrest. A referendum abolished the monarchy. On the 16th of May 1975, Sikkim became India's 22nd state. Hope Cook was not in the palace when the crown ended. She was in a rented apartment in Manhattan, learning from newspapers that the country she had married into no longer existed. She had traded her citizenship for a kingdom. Both were gone within a decade. It required a private bill in Congress, signed by President Ford in 1976, just to give her permanent resident status. She had been a queen. Now she was a paperwork problem. She divorced in 1980. The Chogyal died of cancer in New York in 1982. She reinvented herself as an urban historian of the city she had once left as a debutante. She is still alive. The kingdom of Sikkim is not. Some royal families lose the country before they lose the crown. The next queen lost the crown first. Number 9 is Farida of Egypt. In January 1938, 16-year-old Safinaz Zulfikar walked into Kuba Palace in a wedding gown by the House of Worth, married King Farouk, and became the first Egyptian queen since Cleopatra to leave the seclusion of the harem. She chaired the Red Crescent Society. She was honorary president of the Egyptian Feminist Union. The public loved her. The public did not love him. The crack was already there. 3 daughters, no son. A husband who was politically weak, corrupt, and increasingly gluttonous. In 1942, British tanks surrounded Abdeen Palace and forced Farouk to accept a government of their choosing. The king began appearing at receptions with mistresses. He excluded his wife. She initiated divorce. On the 19th of November 1948, the marriage was dissolved. Farouk was publicly hissed at Cairo cinemas when the news broke. Farouk remarried a 16-year-old commoner. It did not help him. On the 23rd of July 1952, the free officers seized power. 3 days later, King Farouk boarded the royal yacht Mahrusa in Alexandria in a naval officer's uniform and dark glasses. On the 18th of June 1953, the monarchy of Egypt was formally abolished. Farouk's dynasty ended in a yacht. Farida was not on the yacht. She had chosen exile from the crown 4 years before the crown chose exile from Egypt. She lived in Zamalek. She began to paint. She exhibited her canvases in Cairo in 1980, 27 years after the monarchy she had once represented had been thrown into the sea. She died in Cairo in 1988. Her successor Nariman went into exile with Farouk, divorced him inside 2 years, and came home broke. Farida had chosen. Nariman had been chosen for. Number 8 did not have the luxury of choice. She had 388 days. Countess Geraldine Apponyi was called the White Rose of Hungary. On the 27th of April 1938, she married King Zog I of the Albanians in Tirana. Mussolini's son-in-law, Count Ciano, acted as witness. The wedding cake was 10 feet across, cut with the king's saber. The The wedding presents included a phaeton from Admiral Horthy of Hungary and a scarlet supercharged Mercedes-Benz from Adolf Hitler. The physical world of the crown was fresh, expensive, and thin. Albania had only been declared a kingdom in 1928. Zog was a self-made monarch of a poor country wedged between Italy and Yugoslavia. Mussolini was watching. On the 5th of April 1939, Geraldine gave birth to Crown Prince Leka. 2 days later, Italian tanks rolled into Albania. The royal family fled with a 2-day-old baby. A puppet regime in Tirana announced that the crown of Albania had passed to King Victor Emmanuel of Italy. Geraldine had been queen for 388 days. She would remain in exile for 62 years. Greece, Turkey, Romania, Poland, Sweden, Belgium, France, the Ritz in London, Egypt at the invitation of King Farouk, France again. After Zog died in a Paris suburb in 1961, Spain, Rhodesia, South Africa. She styled herself Queen Mother of Albania for the remaining decades, an office that referred to a country that no longer had a king. In 2001, when Albanian law was finally changed to permit her return, she came home. She died 5 months later. She is buried in the mausoleum of the Albanian royal family in Tirana, in the country she governed for 388 days. 3 queens, 3 collapses. The next queen would defend her kingdom herself, from the ramparts, and still lose everything. Number 7 was 17 years old when the kingdom that gave her a crown ceased to exist. She would live another 64 years, remembering it. Duchess Maria Sophie in Bavaria was the younger sister of the Empress Elizabeth of Austria, the woman the world would come to call Sisi. In February 1859, at 17, she married Francis, Crown Prince of Naples. 3 months later, her father-in-law died. She became Queen of Naples and Sicily, the largest of the pre-unification Italian kingdoms, a Bourbon realm that had ruled the south of the peninsula for more than a century. The palace was the Regia di Caserta. On paper, the kingdom looked eternal. The crack was already open. Her husband was shy, sheltered, and physically unable to consummate the marriage for years. Garibaldi was preparing his expedition of the Thousand. Garibaldi landed at Marsala in May 1860 and took Sicily with astonishing ease. By September, Francis and Maria Sophie had abandoned Naples for the coastal fortress of Gaeta. There, between November 1860 and February 1861, the last stand of the Bourbon dynasty played out under 3 months of bombardment. The 17-year-old queen walked the ramparts. She nursed the wounded. She gave her own food to the defenders. She dared the attackers to shoot her. When the enemy fleet asked her to mark her residence with a flag so they could avoid it, she refused. Gaeta capitulated on the 13th of February, 1861. On the 20th of March, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies formally dissolved into the newly proclaimed Kingdom of Italy. She was still 19. She had been a queen for less than 2 years. She was already a legend. Gabriele D'Annunzio would call her the stern little Bavarian eagle. Marcel Proust would call her the soldier queen on the ramparts of Gaeta. She was no longer queen of anything. The aftermath was long and quietly humiliating. The Pope gave the exiled couple sanctuary at the Palazzo Farnese in Rome. In 1862, Maria Sophie became pregnant by a captain of the Papal Guard and gave birth in an Ursuline convent in Augsburg. The child was handed to foster parents in France. In 1870, Rome fell to Italy. Her husband died in 1894. In 1900, King Umberto I of Italy was assassinated by an anarchist. Rumor, never proven, linked her to the plot. She died in Munich in January 1925, at 83. In 1984, her body was moved to the Church of Santa Chiara in Naples and buried beside her husband. Bavaria buried her. Naples took her back only after Naples too had forgotten she had ever been queen. If Gaeta was killed by artillery, number 6 was killed by paperwork and a covered carriage. Supayalot was the last queen of Burma. In 1878, aged 18, she married her half-brother, King Thibaw, the last monarch of the Konbaung dynasty. Her mother had secured Thibaw's throne by ordering the palace massacre of 1879, in which between 80 and 100 royal relatives were killed to eliminate rivals. Mandalay Palace was gold. The lion throne sat under a 9-tiered spire. Servants approached the royal presence gliding on their stomachs. Supayalot, uniquely in Burmese royal history, forced her king into monogamy. The kingdom was already amputated. The Second Anglo-Burmese War had carved off Lower Burma in 1852. A commercial dispute gave London its pretext. On the 7th of November 1885, the Third Anglo-Burmese War began. It lasted less than 3 weeks. On the 25th of November 1885, King Thibaw and Queen Supayalot left Mandalay Palace through the southern gate in a covered bullock carriage. British soldiers lined the road. Their subjects wailed. They boarded a steamboat on the Irrawaddy. He was 27. She was 26. Neither of them ever saw Mandalay again. They were interned at Ratnagiri, a small coastal town on the western side of the Indian subcontinent, on the opposite shore of the Bay of Bengal from Burma. She could not even look toward the country she had once ruled. For 34 years, she wrote letters to the viceroy in Calcutta, pleading for a larger allowance, for the return of her jewels, for permission to go home. The British nicknamed her Soup Plate. Thibaw died in Ratnagiri in December 1916 without ever setting foot in Burma again. In 1919, they let her come back, not to Mandalay, to Rangoon, the colonial capital that had grown up while she was away. Nationalists began to gather around her. She had been recast, without her doing much of anything, into a symbol. She died in Rangoon in November 1925. The British colonial government declared the day of her funeral a public holiday. The governor of Burma attended. Her family's request that she be buried in Mandalay was refused. In life, the British had branded her a capricious tyrant. In death, they buried her at state expense. Her funeral procession, more than the surrender at Mandalay 40 years earlier, gave Burmese nationalism its symbol. They took the kingdom, then the palace, then the name, then the jewels. What they could not take was the funeral procession. Number 5 is the queen killed by a signature. Ranavalona III became Queen of Madagascar on her 22nd birthday in November 1883. She had been educated by the London Missionary Society. She was married, according to Marina political tradition, to the aging Prime Minister Rainilai Erivoni, who had also married her 2 predecessors. Her palace was the Rova of Antananarivo. Her problem was Paris. She wrote to President Grover Cleveland asking for American protection. Washington did nothing. In 1895, French artillery bombarded Antananarivo. On the 18th of January 1896, the French colonial treaty made Madagascar a French colony. She was kept on the throne as a figurehead. Then the Menalamba rebels rose against French rule. She was accused of encouraging them. On the night of the 27th of February 1897, the French Governor-General Joseph Gallieni arrested her by surprise. She was carried out of her palace on a palanquin, escorted by around 400 officials, while the city slept. The monarchy of Madagascar was formally abolished the next day. She was informed that she was now a French subject and that she could no longer style herself Queen of Madagascar. She was exiled first to Réunion. In 1899, she was told she was being moved to Paris. She was delighted. She liked ordering clothes from Paris. When her ship docked at Marseille, she was told the destination was Algeria. She burst into tears. She said, according to the account preserved by her lady companion, "Who is certain of tomorrow? Only yesterday I was a queen. Today I am simply an unhappy, broken-hearted woman." She was housed in a villa in the Mustafa district of Algiers, given an annual pension of 25,000 francs paid from the budget of the colony that used to be her country. She wrote twice for permission to return to Madagascar, in 1910 and 1912. Both requests were refused, ostensibly for insufficient funds in the colonial coffers. She died in Algiers on the 23rd of May, 1917. The strange trace came later. In 1938, 21 years after her death, her body was exhumed and shipped home. When fire destroyed the royal tombs in 1995, her remains were the only ones that could be saved. Her crown, seized by the French, was returned to Madagascar only in 2020. Every request to come home had been refused because of money. When she came home at last, she came in a box. 3 queens exiled. 3 kingdoms erased. But the next queen was locked inside her own palace and forced to watch the flag come down from a window she could not open. Number 4 is Liliuokalani of Hawaii. She was the first sovereign queen her country ever had. She would also be the last sovereign of any kind. When her brother King Kalakaua died in January 1891, she inherited a kingdom that had been recognized by treaty by every major power in the Pacific, with its own flag, its own postage stamps, its own national anthem. She inherited Iolani Palace, the only royal palace on American soil. The crack had been carved 4 years before. In 1887, armed white businessmen had forced her brother to sign the Bayonet Constitution, stripping the monarchy of most of its powers. Sugar was the kingdom's cash crop. American planters wanted annexation. She proposed a new constitution restoring voting rights to native Hawaiians. That was the pretext her enemies had been waiting for. A group of American businessmen who called themselves the Committee of Safety began plotting. The United States Minister, John L. Stevens, ordered 300 U.S. Marines ashore from the USS Boston to protect them. On the 17th of January 1893, to avoid bloodshed, she yielded her authority under formal written protest. She addressed the protest not to the Committee of Safety, but to the government of the United States, trusting they would undo the action of its representative. Grover Cleveland ordered an investigation. The Blount report concluded the overthrow had been unlawful. The provisional government refused to give back the throne. On the 4th of July 1894, Sanford Dole declared himself president of the Republic of Hawaii. In January 1895, her supporters attempted an armed counter-revolution. It failed. She was arrested, tried for treason by a military commission, sentenced to 5 years of hard labor, and locked inside an upstairs bedroom of her own palace. To pass the time, she stitched a quilt telling her life story. She composed hymns. In 1898, the United States annexed Hawaii by the Newlands Resolution, a simple congressional bill, not even a treaty. A petition of over 37,000 Hawaiian signatures against annexation was ignored. She was offered a chance to watch the raising of the American flag over her former palace. She refused. She could not bear to see the Hawaiian flag lowered. She lived out the rest of her life at Washington Place, a short walk from Iolani Palace, on a small government pension. She composed Aloha, Oa, the song of the vanished kingdom. She died in November 1917. The strange surviving trace is a song. Aloha. Oa is now sung as farewell around the world by people who have no idea it was written by a queen who had been overthrown by a committee of businessmen with the help of the United States Marine Corps. The other trace is a law. In November 1993, 100 years after the overthrow, the United States Congress passed Public Law 103-150, the Apology Resolution. It formally acknowledged that the overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii had occurred with the active participation of agents and citizens of the United States, and that the native Hawaiian people had never directly relinquished their claims to their inherent sovereignty. They took the throne, they took the palace, they took the flag, they could not take the song. Number 3 did not lose her crown to soldiers. What she lost was bigger than a throne. She was the last woman ever to hold the job she held. Empress Zuditu of Ethiopia was crowned in 1917 in Addis Ababa. Her title was Negiste Negist, Queen of Kings, a female rewriting of Negusa Negist, King of Kings. She was the daughter of Menelik II, the last direct lineal descendant of the Solomonic dynasty, the ancient Ethiopian imperial line that claimed descent from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. She had no living children. She was diabetic. She was, in every practical sense, the terminal figure of a dynasty that had ruled for 6 centuries. Her regent and heir was a young cousin named Ras Tafari Makonnen. He would become better known as Emperor Haile Selassie. During the 14 years of Zauditu's reign, real power gradually shifted to him. In April 1930, at 53, she died. Official cause: complications from typhoid and diabetes. Rumors of poisoning have followed her name ever since. Tafari was crowned Emperor Haile Selassie later that year. The Solomonic Empire survived her by 44 years. In 1974, Haile Selassie was deposed by the Derg. He was, according to widely reported accounts, smothered in his bed the following year, though the government of the time officially attributed his death to circulatory failure. The dynasty ended, but the specific historical category ended 44 years earlier, on Zuditu's deathbed. She was the last empress regnant in world history. Not empress consort, empress regnant, the sovereign ruler in her own name of an empire. Since her death in April 1930, no woman anywhere on earth has held that position. The category had existed since Hatshepsut, Cleopatra, Wu Zetian of Tang China, Catherine the Great. And on the 2nd of April 1930, in a palace in Addis Ababa, it quietly ended. The reason no one remembers her is not that her fall was dramatic. It is that her fall was the last of its kind. 2 queens remain. One died screaming on the floor of a prison cell. The other buried her husband on an island in the Atlantic and outlived her empire by 7 decades. Number 2 left behind one-hand mirror. Wanrong was born in Beijing in 1906. In December 1922, aged 16, she was married to Puyi, who had been the last emperor of the Qing dynasty until his abdication 11 years earlier at the age of 6. Puyi had already been an ex-emperor for longer than she had been able to read. The Forbidden City in the early 1920s was an empire the size of a courtyard. Puyi still received tribute, still had eunuchs, still signed edicts nobody outside the walls obeyed. Wanrong began smoking tobacco, laced with opium. In October 1924, the warlord Feng Yuxiang staged a coup in Beijing and expelled the imperial family from the Forbidden City. They fled first to the Japanese legation, then to the Japanese concession in Tianjin. Her opium consumption grew. Then Japan invented a country for her husband. In 1931, the Kwantung Army invaded Manchuria and set up a puppet state called Manchukuo. On the 1st of March 1934, Puyi was crowned emperor of Manchukuo. Wanrong hated the Japanese. In 11 years as its empress, she made only 2 significant public appearances. She tried twice to escape and failed. Her opium consumption reached by 1938 an estimated 2 ounces a day. She had an affair and gave birth to a daughter Puyi could not have fathered. According to Puyi's own later account in his autobiography, the infant was killed on his orders, and Wanrong was told the baby had been given to a foster family. She spent the rest of her life dreaming of a child who did not exist. On the 9th of August 1945, the Soviet Union invaded Manchukuo. Puyi fled the palace and left Wanrong behind. He was captured by the Soviets. Wanrong and her sister-in-law, the Japanese aristocrat Hirosaga, tried to escape to Korea and were captured by Chinese communist guerrillas in January 1946. She was moved from prison to prison in the Jilin countryside. She was suffering from severe opium withdrawal. Hirosaga later wrote that all day long the empress rolled around on the wooden floor, screaming and moaning like a madwoman, her eyes wide with agony. She hallucinated that she was back in the Forbidden City. She gave commanding orders to the prison guards, who laughed at her. On the 20th of June 1946, she died in a prison cell in Yanji, aged 39. Her body was never found. Some accounts say she was wrapped in cloth and thrown into the hills north of Yanji. Others say she was buried south of the town. In 2006, 60 years after her death, her younger brother Runki conducted a ritual burial for her at the Western Qing tombs. There was no body to inter. The monument he built contained a hand mirror that had belonged to her. She had been empress consort of the Qing dynasty 2 years after the Qing dynasty had legally ceased to exist. She had been empress of Manchukuo when Manchukuo was a Japanese fiction. Both her thrones had been imaginary while she was sitting on them. She had 2 crowns, 2 empires, 2 palaces. She left behind one hand mirror. Number 1 is the woman the empire buried anyway. Zita of Bourbon-Parma became Empress of Austria and Queen of Hungary at 24. In June 1914, her husband's uncle Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo. Charles became heir to 50 million subjects. In November 1916, the old emperor Franz Joseph died. Charles became emperor. On the 30th of December 1916, they were crowned King and Queen of Hungary in Budapest. The Habsburg dynasty had ruled continuously in Central Europe since the 13th century. They came to the throne in the middle of a war they were losing. In 1917, Charles used Zita's brothers, officers in the Belgian army, to open secret peace talks with France. The Sixtus affair was leaked to the press in 1918. It destroyed Charles's credibility in Berlin. In October 1918, the empire fell apart along ethnic lines. On the 11th of November 1918, Charles signed a document renouncing participation in state affairs. He never formally abdicated. In March 1919, the family left Austria for exile in Switzerland. On the 3rd of April, the new Republic of Austria passed the Habsburg Exclusion Act, nullifying their titles and confiscating their property. In 1921, Charles made 2 failed attempts to reclaim the Hungarian throne. The Allies decided the family had to be sent somewhere far and small. A British warship carried Charles and Zita, under guard, via Constantinople, to a destination they did not know until they were at sea. It was the Portuguese island of Madeira. They landed at Funchal in November 1921. Zita was pregnant with their 8th child. They lived first at the Villa Vittoria, then at the Quinta do Monte. The Conference of Ambassadors had agreed on a pension of 500,000 gold francs a year, to be paid by the successor states of the old empire. None of the successor states paid. In March 1922, after a shopping trip in Funchal, Charles caught a cold. It became pneumonia. On the 1st of April 1922, at 12:23 in the afternoon, Charles said the word Jesus and died. He was 34. She was 29. She was left with 7 children, an 8th on the way, no money, and a widowhood that would last 67 years. Alfonso XIII of Spain arranged a villa for her at Lecatio. She moved the family to Belgium in 1929. When the Nazis invaded Belgium in 1940, she fled through France, Spain, Portugal, and finally to Quebec. The Republic of Austria refused her permission to enter its territory. She had no country. She wore black. She kept her husband's heart. Habsburg tradition preserved the hearts of emperors separately. She carried it with her into every country she had to move to. She raised her son Otto to be a claimant to a throne no state recognized. She never remarried. In 1982, 63 years after her exile, the Republic of Austria decided that an empress consort was not personally covered by the Habsburg Exclusion Act. She set foot in Austria for the first time since 1919. She was 90 years old. She was received in Vienna as if she had never left. She died in Zeisers, Switzerland, on the 14th of March 1989, at 96. The Republic of Austria buried her the way the empire would have buried an empress. On the 1st of April 1989, exactly 67 years after Charles had died on Madeira, her funeral procession moved through Vienna. 6 black horses drew her hearse. The carriage was the same one that had carried the coffin of Franz Joseph in 1916 in Vienna's last imperial funeral. A 21-gun salute normally reserved for heads of state fired across the city. She was interred in the Kapuzinergruft, the Habsburg crypt beneath the Capuchin church where Habsburg emperors had been buried since 1633. Her heart was removed, according to tradition, and placed later beside her husband's at the Muri Abbey in Switzerland. It was the last imperial funeral Vienna will ever see. She had been empress of an empire that no longer existed for 7 decades. The empire buried her anyway, in the same carriage, on the same date, in the same crypt, as if she had never left. 10 women. 10 last crowns. Some lost the throne while the country still existed. Some watched the country vanish while the title survived. One outlived her empire by 70 years. One left nothing behind but a hand mirror. Crowns can be legislated away, palaces can become museums, treaties can rewrite maps overnight. But the women who wore the last crowns went on breathing for decades afterward, in rented villas, prison cells, Manhattan apartments, and Alpine convents, still being addressed as Your Majesty by servants of countries that no longer answered the phone.